Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to uncover the unsung administrative heroes who actually kept the empire running. Because behind every single legion's shield wall was something way less glamorous than a sword. It was a filing system. Today we are looking at the clerks, the ledgers, and the pack mules that essentially functioned as the hard drive of the Roman war machine.
Here is our master ledger for today. First, we'll look at the problem of scale. Second, the anatomy of a legion. Third, the administration hierarchy. Fourth, we'll meet the military scribes. And finally, fifth, the data logistics network.
Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, the problem of scale.
A force of this magnitude simply does not run on discipline and swords alone. You literally cannot march 30 legions across the known world without knowing exactly who is alive, who's on leave, who's sick in bed, who is owed money, and, crucially for Rome, who owes the army money back. To pull this off, the Romans embedded a dedicated, highly trained administrative corps right inside every single legion just to log these transactions accurately and permanently.
Moving on to Section 2, anatomy of a legion.
To understand this massive data network, we kind of need to build a legion from the ground up. And it all starts with the number 8. This was the absolute most basic, fundamental building block of the Roman army.
This block was called the contubernium. Basically, it was a brotherhood of 8 tent mates, but it wasn't just 8 guys hanging out. It was a completely self-sustaining micro-unit. They were supported by 1 to 2 military slaves and 1 to 2 pack mules carrying their heavy gear. This is where soldiers lived, where they ate, and where all their daily activities were ground down into localized data points.
Now, let's scale that up a bit. Take that basic unit and multiply by 10.
10 of those tent groups formed a century. This was a functional combat and administrative block of 80 legionaries, bringing with them dozens of slaves, mules, and tents. And this is the crucial level where specialized officers step in to take control of both the men and, you guessed it, their data.
Now combine all those centuries into a single massive legion, and the logistical footprint just completely explodes. Beyond a theoretical paper strength of over 5,000 infantrymen, you also have roughly 1,400 slaves, 1,600 mules, and nearly 300 officers. Think about that for a second. Almost 1 in 5 living, breathing beings that needed to be fed, equipped, and tracked by the army wasn't even a soldier. It was an animal.
Section 3, the administration hierarchy.
To bridge a 2,000-year gap, it really helps to think of this like a modern corporate org chart. So your centurion, he was essentially your department manager handling overall command. Then you have the tesserarius, basically your shift supervisor, managing sentry duty and watchwords. The signifer wasn't just carrying around a fancy flag. He was the head of payroll, completely in charge of the unit's finances. And finally, the cornicularius acted as the chief of staff and head of records, supervising the entire department of military clerks.
Which brings us to Section 4, meet the military scribes.
These clerks, known as librarii, were the absolute backbone of the Roman army's institutional integrity. We're talking about a dedicated staff of about 15 men, requiring another 15 supply mules just to carry the sheer physical weight of their paperwork. They were tracking payrolls, deductions, service logs, leave requests, supply and equipment tallies, and reconnaissance reports. This data entry was considered so vital, these clerks were legally classified as immune from ditch digging and sentry duty. Their labor was considered just as essential to survival as a man standing on the wall.
But why was this meticulous tracking so desperately important to the average, everyday soldier? Well, it comes down to a pretty stunning economic reality.
Roughly 2/3 of a legionary's yearly salary was automatically deducted to pay for their food, their clothing, and common camp expenses. Literally 2/3. Just imagine your paycheck today. If your boss took 2/3 of it for room and board, you would absolutely demand to see the receipts, right? Logging these microtransactions with total accuracy was honestly a matter of life and death for the officers. It was the only way to prevent mutinies and maintain the morale of heavily armed men.
And finally, Section 5, the data logistics network.
Let's contrast a modern server room with the gritty, muddy reality of a Roman camp. Today, we're used to silicon chips, fiber optics, perfectly climate-controlled rooms, and instant uploads. The Roman server room was an office tent, the Tabularium Legionis. It ran on wax tablets, scratching quills, those 15 specialized human clerks, and pack mules to physically carry the heavy wooden and parchment ledgers. Data back then wasn't floating in the cloud, it was incredibly heavy.
So here is the step-by-step of how that information flowed from a single muddy tent all the way to the emperor's desk. First, the tesserarius collects the daily watch and duty data. Next, the signifer logs the financial deductions for the food eaten that day. Then, the cornicularius compiles all of this into the legion's master ledger. And finally, a train of mules physically transports these consolidated, incredibly heavy records across roads and oceans straight back to Rome. Behind every glorious shield wall was a filing system. Lose that data, and you don't just lose paperwork, you lose the ability to pay your soldiers, feed them, or even know where they are stationed. It really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? Was the true superpower of the Roman Empire its perfectly drilled swordsmen or its incredibly organized spreadsheets? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.